Hello, calling to order this meeting of the Planning and Development Council of the Town of Oakville. It's November 25th, 2024 at 6:30 p.m. Madam Clerk, do we have regrets for this evening?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we have Councillors Grant and Duddick.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Madam Clerk, I don't see any. Would two of us like to move in a committee of the whole? Councillor Longo, Councillor McNeice, thank you. Any objection? Madam Clerk, there's no objection. That carries. Council, would someone like to move the consent items? Councillor Knoll, thank you for that. Any objection? There's no objection. The consent items are adopted as presented. Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Your Worship. Sorry, a little slow with the browser here. Just briefly, I want to separate 4.5 just for an information purpose for council. That address at 2167, I'd like to acknowledge that one time, Councillor Terry Manel, who was an Oakville councillor, lived at that property, and I think he'd be very pleased with the designation happening. So I just want to make a note of that.
Thank you very much. No. Beg your pardon? Oh, sorry, 4.8, we have a delegation. But yes, Councillor Chisholm, I wanted to finish my thought on that. All of us who knew Terry Manel, I mean, he was a legend in his own time, right? And his father before him, or even with him. For 4.8, Council, I apologize. We have a delegation of Bailey Russell, who's here if we had questions, but we didn't. So, Madam Clerk, I don't think we really need that. So I think we're now good to move to our public hearing items. 6.1 is the public meeting report. That's the zoning bylaw amendment for Tafia Development Corp. And staff are available if council have questions. And we have a representative from Tafia if we have questions for them. And we have a delegation from a resident who I'm inclined to recognize unless council wants a presentation and other discussion first. Not seeing any. So, Madam Clerk, could you call the delegation?
Majed Abukhader.
And are they online?
They were supposed to be in person.
Beg your pardon?
They were supposed to be in person.
Council, that person does not appear to be here as expected. So let's just check the participants online and see if there's any. All right. I guess they thought better of it. So, Council, Councillor Hazlet-Thiel.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. My question's for Director Charles. I just wanted to double check on the permitted uses. It also talks about a hotel, a club, and I noted that, you know, this is the proposal is to allow then an indoor playground, gymnastics clubs, indoor sports. And they would exclude the nightclub, but are we excluding the hotel and a couple of the other elements that are in that zoning?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if I may turn over to Ms. McPhail, who can provide a little bit more detail on the application, if I may.
Thanks.
Through the chair, or sorry, through the mayor to the councillor, the application before you is what was presented to staff. Staff have noted that the application is to add the commercial fitness center and other provisions related to parking and the gross floor area. When it comes to hotel and other permitted uses, those have not been sought from the applicant. So that's the appropriate the use of a hotel if it's a will of the council to include whether or not that is an issue, we can add that to the list.
Okay, so forgive me, I just want to make sure I'm clear. So if it's not in the proposal, but it is in the permitted uses. Do you need council to consider whether we itemize other items that we would say not be permitted on that area?
Through the mayor to the councillor, that if that's the will of committee to consider other uses that are currently permitted that should not be permitted, that would be up to council.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. A motion would be in order. Councillor Shi, thank you. I think it's your ward, right? Any objection to Councillor Shi's motion? Madam Clerk, there being none, that carries. And that brings us to 6.2, the town-initiated official plan amendments for the Neagawa Urban Core Review. And we have a presentation from our staff, Catherine Buckerfield, and let's all look forward to that.
Good evening, Mayor Burton, members of council, and the public. As mentioned, my name is Catherine Buckerfield, and I'm a senior planner on the West Development team with the town. I am pleased to be presenting information about the Neagawa Urban Core Review and resulting proposed town-initiated official plan amendments for consideration by council, key stakeholders, and the public. Today is a statutory public meeting. If you are watching the live stream of this meeting and you wish to speak to this item, please call 905-815-6095. We'll connect you to the meeting and you'll be called on to speak following the registered delegations. To begin, I'd like to walk you through what we'll be touching on through today's presentation. I'll start off with a summary of the recommendation, remind everyone where the study location is, walk through the timeline of review so far, touch on the policy context, introduce the proposed OPAs, provide a summary of the review and various factors that were considered in the preparation of the proposed OPAs, confirm the policy conformity, and review next steps, and finish with a review of the recommendation. I wanted to highlight the recommendations of the public meeting report and the purpose for being here today. So first, that the report be received. Second, that comments from the public and council on the proposed OPAs be received. And finally, that we forward the public meeting report to the Ministry of Transportation, Halton Region, the Town of Milton, and the North Oakville Community Builders, Inc., also known as NOCB, to support the implementation of the 407 transit station at Neagawa Boulevard and Highway 407. I'd like to situate us in the context of the Town of Oakville. The study area lands are located in North Oakville in the area of Burnenthorpe Road West and Neagawa Boulevard. The lands are adjacent to Highway 407 and the Town of Milton to the north, northwest of the Uptown Core, and northeast of the Hospital District nodes in Oakville. The study area boundary includes all four quadrants of the intersection of Neagawa Boulevard and Burnenthorpe Road West. The Neagawa Urban Core, which I'll refer to as the NUC going forward, was initiated at Planning and Development Council on October 4th, 2021. At that meeting, Council endorsed the study area boundary for the review, directed the staff to undertake additional analysis and consultation regarding the NUC area, and prepared subsequent town-initiated OPAs for the NUC, and report back at a future meeting of Planning and Development Council. A virtual public information meeting was held on February 17th, 2022 to provide background and information and allow the opportunity for the community to ask questions and provide input to the study. A statutory public meeting was held on May 16th, 2022 for two town-initiated proposed OPAs for the NUC. Since then, additional planning work and changes occurred affecting the NUC review, such as updates to the regional official plan, a new provincial planning statement that replaced the provincial policy statement and growth plan, the progression of the North Oakville East commercial study, discussions with landowners, and additional internal review through various internal departments for feedback, and a review of our best practices of policy within the town. Given the time elapsed since May 2022 and the nature of the changes that have occurred and the new inputs to the NUC review, a second statutory public meeting is appropriate for the revised draft OPAs. This will give council and the public an opportunity to review the draft OPAs and provide comments. Following this meeting, staff will take back any requests for additional information and aim to return with recommendation in Q1 of 2025. Planning in Oakville involves two policy layers, the provincial policy and the local official plans. At the provincial level, we have the Planning Act, which directs the overarching rules for planning in Ontario. The provincial planning statement is a streamlined province-wide land use planning policy framework that replaced both the provincial policy statement 2020 and the growth plan for the Greater Portland Horseshoe 2019. While building upon housing supportive policies from both those documents, it came into effect on October 20th, 2024, and going forward, I'll refer to this as the PPS. The town has 3 official plans, including the Halton Region official plan, the 1984 official plan, which includes the North Oakville East secondary plan, and the Livable Oakville official plan. Official plans are high-level planning documents that act as a playbook with policies to guide development, and their purpose is to implement the provincial policy. When considering the policy context, we typically start with looking at the town-wide urban structure, which is embedded within the Livable Oakville Plan and the Regional Official Plan. Lands within the study area are identified as element of the town-wide urban structure as a node for further study, and location for potential transit station area. Neagauer Boulevard is also identified as a mobility link, consistent with Halton Region's mobility management strategy. The town-wide urban structure represents a community-based view and a unanimous council direction to provide for the long-term protection of natural heritage, open space, and cultural heritage resources, maintaining this character of established areas, providing the foundation to direct growth to identified nodes such as strategic growth areas and corridors. For areas identified within the urban structure as nodes for further study, the official plan states that a future review shall provide updated and new policies to delineate boundaries, the mix of uses, and the intensity and scale of development. This is what we're doing now through the NUC review and the proposed OPAs. At the provincial level, we have our provincial planning statement, and I want to go over what a strategic growth area is. It means an area with settlement areas, nodes, corridors, and other areas that have been identified by municipalities to be the focus for accommodating intensification and higher density mixed uses in a more compact built form. Since May 2022, 2 regional official plan amendments, also known as ROPAs, came into effect. Had the effect of establishing a regional urban structure within the regional official plan. Embedded in that urban structure was Oakville, Town of Oakville's urban structure. ROPA 49 identified the NUC as a primary regional node and assigned a minimum density target of 160 residents and jobs combined per hectare, and a general target proportion of residents and jobs of 85% to 15%. ROPA 49 also implemented a conversion of employment areas lands within the NUC boundary, which will be touched on further later in this presentation. The Halton Region Official Plan, also known as the ROP, identifies areas across the town of Oakville as strategic growth areas and assigns a minimum density target based on residents and jobs combined per hectare. This chart shown here identifies the town's strategic growth areas and their minimum density targets. As mentioned, the NUC is a primary regional node with 160 residents and jobs combined per hectare. Section 79 of the Halton Regional Official Plan aligns key objectives for strategic growth areas, which includes various elements that support a complete community, such as, but not limited to, a diverse and compatible mix of land uses, including residential and employment uses, a vibrant, diverse, and pedestrian-oriented urban environment, promotes active transportation and is environmentally more sustainable, and generally achieves higher densities than the surrounding areas. The NUC is subject to the North Oakville East Secondary Plan. Planning for North Oakville dates back to 1987, when these lands were set for growth through the Halton Region Urban Structure Plan. Oakville conducted a detailed land use planning process in the 1990s and 2000s. This involved public consultations, technical studies, and policy development, culminating in the creation of the North Oakville East Secondary Plan and the North Oakville West Secondary Plan, both approved by the Ontario Municipal Board, now the Ontario Land Tribunal, in 2008 and 2009. These plans focus on sustainability, promoting a mix of land uses, protecting the natural area environment, and implementing a modified grid system to improve transit that enhances transportation options for transit and pedestrians. The vision for North Oakville is to create a compact, pedestrian-friendly urban community with diverse housing options. Staff notes that a key feature of the North Oakville secondary plans has been to guide long-term planning and protection for the future 407 transitway stations. This has been reflected in numerous planning approval decisions by town and regional councils since the plans came to effect in 2008 and 9. The North Oakville East Secondary Plan applies to the lands north of Dundas Street and south of Highway 407, which is where the Nagawa Urban Core is located. Portions of the study area are currently designated Nagawa Urban Core, Neighborhood Area, and Employment District. A key opportunity in planning for the NUC is its role in the broader transportation system. The location of the NUC at the intersection of Burnhamthorpe Road West and Nagawa Boulevard is advantageous from the perspective of the transportation network and the delivery of mass public transit. This is further supported by the region's capital plan to extend James Snow Parkway to connect this area to Milton. Nagawa Boulevard is also identified in the urban structure as a mobility link consistent with the region's mobility management strategy. Mobility links are key to connecting people via transit throughout the region, as well as to local destinations, including nodes, mobility hubs, major transit station areas, and employment areas. Highway 407 is identified as a regional transit priority corridor, which provides a key focus for transit supportive development. The 407 Transitway is a major transit facility planned for the Highway 407 corridor that will run between Brant Street in the city of Burlington to Brock Road in the city of Pickering. It will consist of a two-lane grade-separated facility on an exclusive right-of-way designed for bus rapid transit, but with the opportunity to convert to light rail in the future if needed. An integrated transit protection project assessment process, an EPR, was completed for the 407 Transitway in 2020, but unfortunately it did not include a station at the intersection of Highway 407 and Nagawa Boulevard, whereas previous versions of the Transitway plan had shown a station in that area. The town identifies lands in the vicinity of the station area as a strategic growth area, while the province characterized the lands as remaining rural. This characterization is what drew the future of a station at Nagawa into question. Following the completion of the EPR, staff continue to provide information to the province to support the 407 transit station. The public meeting report is proposed to be forwarded to the province as further support for the 407 transit station. Beyond a potential 407 transit station, the NUC area is integrated into the planned frequent network route, which was included as part of the Oakville Transit 2025 to 2029 5-year business plan, which was received by Council on October 21st, 2024. The map shown represents the long-term vision for the frequent transit network. So, now that we've got the policy context in place, what are we planning for? We are planning for a complete community. And what that includes is residential and commercial uses, jobs, parks and open space, schools and community amenities, and key transportation linkages. The goal of the NUC review is to delineate the growth area boundary and determine an appropriate mix and scale of land uses in a manner that supports consideration of a 407 transit station. We are planning a transit-supportive, mixed-use, complete community that provides a range of housing choice and a diverse local job base, including traditional, commercial, and office employment. As a result of the findings of the NUC review, 2 town-initiated proposed official plan amendments, otherwise known as OPAs, have been prepared for the consideration by Council. These are OPA 45 and OPA 326. The OPAs are based on work undertaken by town staff and reflect the most current direction of the rule and intent for the NUC within the region and town's urban structures. The proposed amendments conform with relevant in-force and emerging town, regional, and provincial policy and have been updated since the version presented to Council in May 2022. The 2 proposed OPAs identify and establish policies for the Nagawa Urban Core. OPA 45, Livable Oakville, which is the simple one out of the 2. It updates the land use schedule the urban structure from nodes and corridors for further study to be nodes and corridors. OPA 326 is much more involved and proposes updates to the North Oakville East Secondary Plan, which would have the effect of designating lands as urban core, Niagara urban core area, updating land use policies that include a mix of transit supportive uses, and introducing functional implementation policies to enable and guide development. From here, I'm going to progress the presentation by going through various topics that led into the review and helped with the development of the OPAs. And this includes existing context and development applications that are currently with the town, proposed employment conversion, boundary update, land use compatibility, population and employment, height and density, commercial requirements, public realm and livability, and finally climate resiliency. To start, I'd like to take you through the existing context. This is the current NUC study area boundary with existing air photo. The brown added to the map indicates existing development, which consists of a residential area in King's Christian Collegiate in the southwest quadrant. While we're planning a largely new community, it's important to recognize what already exists. In addition to existing development, there are active development applications that overlap with the study area. The Sherburne Lodge zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan of subdivision applications propose a new village square and an elementary school block in a total of 513 new residential dwelling units, including 70 single detached lots, 147 townhouses on-street double frontage and back-to-back townhouses, and 296 apartment units. A statutory public meeting took place at the March 7th, 2022 Planning and Development Council meeting. And I do want to point out that only a portion of this application is within the Niagara Urban Core. Next, we have an application by Remington Eno, which is an official plan, zoning bylaw amendment, and the draft plan of subdivision. This consists of 287 single detached dwellings, 307 townhouse dwellings, and 3 future mixed-use apartment blocks, 1 neighborhood park, and an elementary school block. This statutory public meeting also took place on March 7th in 2022. The official plan amendment, zoning bylaw amendment, and plan of subdivision applications proposed by Argo Niagara Corporation proposed to develop the subject lands as a mixed-use community with residential stormwater management pond and opportunities for commercial on the ground floor of a mixed-use block. The applicant's proposal consists of a mix of apartment buildings, laneway townhouses, back-to-back townhouses, and dual frontage townhouses, totaling just under 1,000 new residential units. This statutory public meeting took place on May 21st, 2024, and the applicant has since appealed for a lack of decision by council. All these applications and existing development provide context for the NUC review. An employment conversion of the northeast and northwest quadrants took place at the regional level through ROPA 49 that came into effect on November 4th, 2022. This conversion was the result of analysis and engagement with the public. We are now proposing an employment conversion at the local level through OPA 326. The employment area conversion will enable development of the NUC area as a mixed-use, complete community at an overall density in residence and jobs capacity sufficient to support higher order transit. The employment area conversion in this location also supports a range of planning goals related to addressing the climate emergency, enabling the development of complete communities, providing a mix and range of housing types to meet future market demand, ensuring a range of employment opportunities, and providing opportunities for additional commercial development in North Oakville. This slide shows the proposed employment conversion in the context of the existing and planned development. All of this now brings us towards updating the NUC area boundary. We are proposing an update which will implement the employment area conversion by including the lands proposed to be converted to mixed use and increase the land area and growth potential of the NUC area. The updated boundary considers existing development, planning applications including draft plans of subdivision, the employment area conversion considerations, appropriate transition with the adjacent employment area lands, and the location of existing and planned road network and transit facilities. The expansion of the NUC boundary to the east supports a mixed-use node proposed through the Remington Eno application. The NUC boundary is proposed to be extended along William Halton Parkway, a major road. It reflects a higher built form and increased number of units to support the transit terminal and reinforces and expands the vision for the NUC. It also reinforces the activity of node function and allows for non-residential uses by introducing mixed-use permissions. It reinforces the commercial node function discussed in the North Oakville East Commercial Study Report. Through our review, we've determined this updated boundary for the Nayagawa Urban Core area, and these are the lands that you will see in the proposed OPAs. When considering land use conversion from employment to mixed use, it's natural for concerns related to land use compatibility to come up. This was an item brought up in May 2022 that you asked to have more information on. As you can see in yellow, there's employment lands that are adjacent to the lands that are to be converted. Land use compatibility is at the core of planning and one of the main reasons planning even exists. Land use compatibility is mentioned in the PPS, as the PPS encourages intensification of employment uses and compatible, compact, mixed-use development to support the achievement of complete communities in addressing land use compatibility adjacent to employment areas by providing an appropriate transition to sensitive land uses. It also discusses the responsibility of planning authorities to protect long-term viability of existing or planned industrial, manufacturing, or other major facilities that are vulnerable to encroachment by sensitive land uses. Planning authorities are to ensure the long-term operational and economic viability of major facilities and avoid, minimize, and mitigate any adverse effects from odor, noise, and other contaminants, and minimize risk to public health and safety. A tool that planning authorities rely on to assist with compatibility are the province's D6 compatibility between industrial facilities guidelines, also referred to as the D6 guidelines. These guidelines set out adequate buffering of incompatible land uses. Through development applications, applicants are required to prepare land use compatibility reports, and the experts that prepare and review those materials rely on the D6 guidelines for guidance and on adequate separation distances between major facilities and sensitive land uses. Any mitigation required for compatibility is secured through the development process. The intent of the proposed OPAs is to create a community that is compatible with the adjacent lands that are currently reserved for employment uses. The intent is that commercial uses in the NUC could be used as a buffer between the employment lands and potential residential uses to the west, as well as meet the area's retail and commercial needs. As an SGA and primary regional node, the NUC is assigned a minimum target, which we've already discussed, and this density target is considered higher order transit supportive. Through the OPA 326, a wide range of uses will be permitted, including office, retail, and service commercial, institutional, major offices, and medium and high density residential uses. So now onto some of the meat, density and height. So this is specifically for residential and mixed use areas of the NUC, mixed use development. Staff have moved away from using floor space index to manage the density in this specific area since it's not the best tool when dealing with townhouse development. Relying on heights and 160 residents and jobs combined per hectare will be the best approach for this specific area. Through future development applications, applicants will demonstrate that the required density is achieved. To accommodate the projected growth and allow variation in built form, staff is proposing to increase permitted heights for residential and mixed-use development in the northern quadrants to 18 stories. Staff are proposing a minimum of 3 stories over most of the site, with a minimum of 5 stories within 50 meters of the north side of Burnhamthorpe Road West and the east and west sides of Nayagawa Boulevard north of Burnhamthorpe West. The intent of this approach is to create a gateway along Nayagawa Boulevard and Burnhamthorpe Road West. Heights will then transition lower throughout the blocks. This approach will prevent ground-oriented townhouses along the major roads and encourage apartment built form. Staff have also proposed the inclusion of urban design policies to maintain design excellence when allowing for the variations in built form. The NUC is identified as an intersection of interest in the North Oakville East commercial study, which will be discussed later in this evening's agenda. Staff are looking to implement some of the recommendations of the study through the NUC review and support the delivery of commercial uses in an effort to deliver a complete community. Through OPA 326, we are proposing to introduce minimum retail and commercial requirements across the NUC per quadrant. Without these requirements, applicants may not provide adequate commercial uses. Staff would ideally like to see retail and service commercial uses located at grade within a mixed-use building oriented towards the public realm. However, we have introduced criteria for standalone retail and commercial buildings intended to support interim and future development potential. The idea is that properties within the NUC are expected to evolve over time. We expect to see standalone commercial in initial iterations of development, but in the fullness of time, see those sites redevelop and be replaced with mixed-use buildings that maintain a commercial component. The Town of Oakville Parks Plan 2031 was endorsed by Council at the April 8th, 2024 Planning and Development Council meeting. This plan outlines various recommendations specific to strategic growth areas, including a parkland target of 12% of the gross land area as a long-term objective based on the land area and timing of development. This document helps guide parks planning to 2031 and should be kept in consideration as development applications come in to build out the NUC. In an effort to support an improved public realm and augment whatever we would have achieved through the Master Parkland Agreement, staff has introduced a public realm and amenity section within the proposed OPA 326. This section proposes the introduction of elements to support the implementation of parks, including encouraging the delivery of urban squares, promenades, connecting links, and other open spaces being provided in a variety of ownerships to be determined through the development approval process. The planning of the NUC as a complete community with a mix of uses and density supportive of higher order transit is directly aligned with the type of community planning required to address climate change and adaptation. Having people in close proximity to daily needs and transit assists with reducing automobile dependency. A significant response to current trends and consideration of climate change resilience is the approach taken to stormwater management and the incorporation of policies in the proposed OPA 326. Proposed policies related to stormwater management intend to require best practices in accordance with provincial environmental permissions and obligations for municipal stormwater management and to reduce flood risks. As I finish up, I'd like to state that the proposed OPAs are consistent with the provincial planning statement and conforms with both the Halton Region official plan and the Town of Oakville official plans. Going forward, we'll be reviewing all comments and requests for additional information received this evening, and we'll work towards preparing a recommendation for Q1 2025. Town staff will also continue to provide relevant information to the province to support a 407 transit station. Before I go over the recommendation, I'd like to remind everyone what we've covered this evening. We started with a summary of the recommendation. We went over the study location, walked through the timeline of the review so far, touched on the policy context, provided a summary of the review and various factors that were considered in the preparation of the proposed OPAs, which included existing development applications, proposed employment conversion, boundary update, land use compatibility, population and employment, commercial requirements, public realm and livability, and climate resiliency. We summary of the review and specific topics. We did a policy conformity confirmation, went over the next steps, and finally, with the recommendation that the report be received, that comments from the public with respect to the proposed OPAs be received, that staff consider such comments as may be provided by council, and finally, that the report titled, as you can see, be forwarded to the Ministry of Transportation, Halton Region, Town of Milton, and Knockbee to support the implementation of a 407 transit way station at Nagawa Boulevard and Highway 407. Thank you, Mayor and Council and the public.
Thank you, Ms. Buckerfield, for a very comprehensive report. You've generated at least 4 questions. We'll start with Councillor Nanda and proceed from there. Councillor Nanda.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Burton. Thank you so much, Catherine. That was very detailed. So we do appreciate all the information that you provided us. I do have a few questions, however. So when we were talking about the quadrants, the 4 that we have, because King's Collegiate is already existing and we have applications for the south side of Burnham Thorpe, one of the things that I was trying to look into is what our population or what we estimate is going to be the population for the south side, which would determine how much we need to put on the north side to get the 160 per hectare. And I don't know if you'll have all of that information right now, but I think it'll be important since we know that King's Collegiate is already established and we can put more there. We have the applications for the other side, the southeast. So I'm just wondering if we know how much we have there currently, because not all of those applications are in the core area, what we would require north of Burnham Thorpe.
Through you, Mayor, I appreciate the question. And I think that's information that we can definitely provide those specific details when we come in for a recommendation. But it is, you're right, because the South is more established, there's more opportunity in the North to bring about density and new development.
So I think one of the concerns is, are we going to try to put too much density on the north side because we weren't able to develop it and have the population set out more evenly? Are we going to be forced to put much more on the north side because the south side is already planned for? And because of that, is that why we're looking at trying to go to 18 stories versus 12 stories? Is because we're just trying to put more density in a smaller amount of area. So I think that would be important to look at when we're determining how we should change this OPA. The other question is around transit. We have no confirmation from the province that we're going to get this transit station. Do we have enough information to understand and to know what they would require from us to be able to get this transit station?
Through you, Mayor Burton, thank you for the question. So the conversation with the 407 is ongoing. We have a history of exchanges demonstrating that there's additional population and employment growth occurring in a strategic growth area. Currently, they've been looking for us to demonstrate a commitment to intensify and accommodate transit supportive densities in this strategic growth area. So that's what this official plan amendment is intended to provide for. They have a technical review consultant engaged that we're feeding this information into. Part of their consideration is a network, their network, the 407, and how stations relate to each other and where population's coming from. Through our conversations, we've been able to demonstrate the linkage to Milton, as well local frequent transit network, the development by Oakville Transit over time. So there's a lot of interesting opportunities converging in the area.
But we don't know as of now if we were to go forward with this plan that there would still be approval. Like if we built it, that the transit station is actually going to come, or when it's going to come. Correct?
At this time, through you, Mayor Burton, we don't have a specific timing around the station, but we're proceeding on the basis that a station is needed and a station belongs there. That's been our direction for ever since the North Oakville plan came to be.
Okay, so I think because the plan and looking at how much density we're putting there, I feel like we shouldn't go so forward as to, if we put that much density there and for some reason the transit station does not come, then we're going to have traffic issues, right? Within that core area, right? If it so happens that they decide not to put the transit, we put all this density there, then we're stuck with, again, where are the people going to go? They're all going to end up in cars and they're going to have to try to get to transportation.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Burton. We can take that back for further discussion with the province about where they're at and what sort of criteria they're continuing to evaluate. Regardless of the 407, although that's a major piece of infrastructure, we will be serving our Oakville transit quite well in the areas along Burnham-Thorpe and up the Neagawa to James Snow Parkway. So transit is in the equation even without the province.
Okay. And then can we just also look at how this plan would work out if we stayed at the maximum of 12 stories and not having to increase it to 18 stories? I think without visually being able to see a plan of what the area would look like, and again, because some of the south is already planned for, it would be great to be able to see the development on the north side visually, sort of how we've seen Midtown, and then including all the commercial employment lands to be able to see what the area would actually look at. So if we could come back with that, that would be great.
Certainly, through you, Mayor Burton. I think it'd be a great exercise to bring forward to clarify what minimums look like, what the thresholds to achieve transit supportive density look like, and what the maximums look like. And there's different ways of building out a growth area with shorter, wider buildings or taller, slender buildings. So we can have that discussion going forward, certainly.
And lastly, just if you could quickly explain why you decided to take FSI out and just stick to height of the building.
Through your, Mayor Burton, adding to Catherine's comments earlier, so we're actually a lot of livable Oakville and North Oakville is governed by heights. FSI is a measurement that we've removed actually consistently across our various growth areas over the last few years. We're trying it on in Midtown as a regulatory part of the framework. So our approach in North Oakville has been to take FSI out where we have height. Sometimes they work in conflict to create, again, buildings that are shorter and wider versus taller and more slender. It's important to keep in mind as well when we use height here in the Neagawa Urban Core, it's not just height alone. We're also using urban design policies and built form guidelines to help shape those buildings and to create the type of experience we're looking for at the street and also from the vistas and the views around the area. That would be a little bit more explanation around that.
So there would be some restrictions into like the floor plate size, similar to what FSI does?
Through you, Mayor Burton, that's correct. We have some policies in place that will help set the height of podiums and then point towers and the floor plates associated with those. So it's giving shape to those buildings.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I think we'll be continuing this discussion, but I appreciate the information you provided. Thank you, Mayor Burton.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hsu.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. Thank you for the presentation. So I have a couple of questions. So based on the target for 160 per residents and the jobs per hectare, so what we expect the whole population in that area in the future?
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Mayor Burton. The total forecasted population for the Neagawa Urban Core is set out in the Joint Best Planning Estimates, and by 2051 or beyond, we expect the population of people and jobs combined per hectare to reach in total 12,000.
12,000.
12,000 residents and jobs, and I believe that's on an area of about 77 hectares, I believe. Is that our number? 70 hectares. Thank you.
12,000, yeah, that's...
And that gets us to our minimum density.
Okay, so follow on Councilor Nanda's concern, so we have the concern as well. So in order to get this requirement from provincial to get the bus stop station, so we put all the density there, the people's there, but if we cannot get guarantee for have that approval for station from province, it's a big risk for us. So 12,000 population is like huge, because this is like almost a half population with Ward 7 now.
Through you, Mayor Burton, just to clarify the number of residents and jobs, it will be split between residents and employment, and it's 85-15%. So that's our target proportion. So it's not only going to be residents in the fullness of time.
Okay. Okay, my second question is about the west part of Niagara. So is any park, green space, amenity to be considered about that west part? Because for the King's College, that area, parcel land, they never have the park, community park, even the neighborhood park. So we strong to have something on the west side of Niagara. Is there anything can consider in this plan?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there isn't anything detailed currently, Councillor, right in the policies. As Catherine was saying, we're looking to augment what we are already going to be getting through the master parkland agreement. So the idea would be through the development applications themselves to be able to add some parkland or open space or public realm facilities through the development application. So the one that you see on the northwest is currently through Argo Development Corp. So it would be through that particular application we'd be looking to secure some additional opportunities.
Okay, good to know. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Adams?
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the consultations that we've had already on this file over the last little while. I appreciate all of them. I'm going to reiterate some of the comments I've given you in those previous discussions that we've had, and I know that Councillor Nanda has already named a couple of them, and so if there's a little bit of overlap, I apologize. I'm going to start with looking at page 12 of the bylaw element, I guess, page 272, where there's a couple of sections speaking about the retail commercial element and how do we require that. Can we have a review of that issue when this comes back? It was talked about at some length when we talked about the commercial area review, and I'm not satisfied that we've got the wording in here to ensure that we end up with the retail and commercial that we expect. So that's one thing. The farther down on that page, item number 14 speaks about the provision of a food store, and it uses the should instead of the shall wording that we so often talk about at council here, and I wondered if that word could be changed. We talked about earlier, and Councillor Nanda brought it up, the issue of FSI, and it concerns me a great deal that we don't have the FSI as part of the components of the built form and density that are being measured here. We have in, which section is it here? 7664, the building heights, but we don't have any measure of the true density of the units. And so I wondered if we could have a review of how we get to the 160 people and jobs per hectare. Can you show those calculations so we understand why we believe 160 is going to be attained and not some other number? Are we going to get 100? Are we going to get 200? Can we show that work? On page 17, or page 277 of the agenda, under built form, 76634 in the urban design under built form, there's sections D and E, and D speaks to the multiple towers within a block and the creation of variation in height. What does that look like? It says variation, but it doesn't say how much. so there's, how do we know if we've succeeded in attaining that? Similarly, under E, how do we measure the quality of the design and the architectural quality? Is there a measure that is used for that? Or is there competition? Is there a stamp? How do we know that we get that? So those are a few of the issues that I wanted to bring forward. But the number one issue is that issue around the density, and how do we know we get the 160 and not some other number? We've had enormous amounts of debates about whether we should be using FSI or stories in the calculation of density, and it appears to me that we kind of need to have both. And so I wonder if we can have a review of that, and perhaps some options. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Haslett-Deal.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Burton. Just continuing along, Councillor Adams' thinking, I wanted to just go to item 25 in the bylaws. It is it talks about the need for development of these amenities in a timely manner. I'm wondering if we can put concurrent with the development or consider that kind of language. The worry obviously is everybody has a different definition of timely, and concurrent would at least provide services to those that choose to live there. I'm sorry, I don't know the item number, but on another note, it talks about stormwater and green infrastructure, but the language is should, and I'm just wondering, where else do we strengthen, or how do we strengthen that language to emphasize that we are a community that is seeking the most sustainable way to develop? So I'd leave you with that consideration. Under parking, I'm not seeing, and it may be in urban design in a supplementary document, but just the elements of permeable spaces. And I mean, we're moving away from, as a society, large surface parking lots. And there are ways to do parking lots that are more permeable. And again, that's an example of green infrastructure, but it's not in the parking area of the bylaw, so I wondered if that could be considered. In when Catherine referenced the word apartments, is there any requirement, or is it meant that apartments as in rental or condo, or are we neutral on that in this this report?
Through you, Mayor Burton, at this point, we would be neutral in terms of the tenure, but we would be looking for an alternative built form, so have variety in built forms.
Okay. My other is just some clarity around, you talked about townhouses, and I want to just understand from on the arterials, are we talking, and you wanted the apartments there, but townhouses could be on the bottom, not facing onto the arterial, but, so are you just, we're not putting townhouses as a base, it has to be a pure apartment complex. Is that what we're proposing?
Through you, Mayor Burton, are you, I just wanted to clarify your question. So are you saying that a townhouse within a podium wouldn't be okay, or, okay.
No,
okay,
I'm all in on that.
Yeah, okay.
But
no, I think what we've proposed at this point is that within 50 meters of that Burnenthorpe Road West and Nayagawa Boulevard on the north two quadrants, you would have a minimum height of 5 stories, which then you would not be getting a townhouse in that specific location. Okay. But you could have townhouses further into the site at a minimum of 3 stories.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, no problem.
I think I agree with Councillor Nanda. Sometimes it's easier when we can visualize it. But I appreciate that's a lot of work. I just wanted to clarify on this density. So you said the density target is going to, that this is going to achieve will meet what is sufficient for a higher order transit system. So are you referencing that 160 as when we achieve that 160, we have provided sufficient population to meet the requirement for a higher order transit system?
Through you, Mayor Burton, that's correct, Councillor. 160 is the level established in provincial, regional, and local planning frameworks as a transit supportive minimum density for higher order transit, which is light rail and dedicated bus.
Okay, so just as a comparator, when we see the chart that says 200 in Midtown, that is the number that is the minimum for a higher order transit system.
So through you, Mayor Burton, there have been some changes to those numbers over time, and in the Midtown discussion, I believe we've been referring to 200 in the context of our urban structure and our current growth management program, and everything flows from there.
Right, but it's not 2,350, which is what is in front of us at the TOC. So thanks for clarifying that for me. My other question is just around, I just have to find the page. It's in regards to the commercial connection. So I appreciated the work done on the D6 guidelines and making sure that compatibility. Is the distance, if that commercial area is the buffer zone, I think I'm doing this correctly, if the commercial area is the buffer zone, is that consistent with what the D6 guidelines require for a buffer zone?
Through you, Mayor Burton, when implementing the D6 guidelines, there's areas of influence and mitigation and risk and all those kind of things. And so when the development application for those lands would be submitted, we'd be able to review a comprehensive land use compatibility study and determine what the appropriate distances would be and what uses should be within that transition area. And it would be supported by the details of the D6 guidelines.
Okay, it's great to hear that language being used all the time now. And my last comment is around pedestrian access and bike lanes. Is there a plan for bike lanes and in that area as part of this?
Through you, Mayor Burton, through the policies, we've incorporated encouragement for pedestrian connections and bike facilities. So that would be expected through the development and would be reviewed further through development applications.
Thank you very much for answering all the questions, and thank you, Mayor Burton.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Elgar.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Burton. I appreciate the presentation. You gave a very detailed presentation, and it was excellent. My concern is, and Councillor Hazathil nailed it, is 160 persons and jobs combined per hectare. The one word I keep missing hearing is the word is spelled out, minimum. That is the minimum, and it really blows up in our face in Oakville at Midtown, where the minimum is 200, and yet we're coming in between 2,000 and 3,000 people on the first 4.9 hectares of land. So is there any way we can be a little more specific so that the people in North Oakville can get a better feel for what the real truth is going to be? Because, you know, you talk on page 246, there's a talk about the 35 hectares, about flipping employment to it. And so they're going to have an overall, I wonder what is the overall density of person jobs capacity sufficient for the higher order residents in that area for the transit? It obviously is not 160. If the province is telling us we're going to take over 2,000 on under 5 hectares, and that's per hectare, it bothers me that the people are not going to have any idea what's going to hit them as the years roll out. Like, is there any way we can come back with something better than what we have? And I know it's a very high level document, but is there any way we can get more specifics in it now from a height point of view and density as we roll through before we approve everything here?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think, Councillor, I have an idea of what it is you're asking for, so leave that one with us. We'll bring you something when we table this again early next year.
Okay, I thank you, Director Charles. It's tough, and it's getting tougher on us as a council because the province seems to be taking over planning in certain areas, I understand. So, and when you actually have to laugh and talk about bike lanes, it sounds like going forward, we'll have to get approval from the province for bike lanes, from what I read in the paper anyway. Anyway, thank you very much. Good work.
Thank you, Councillor Elgar. I see no sign of other questions. Let me ask for a motion. Councillor Shea, thank you. Council, is there any objection to Councillor Shea's motion? There being none, Madam Clerk, that carries. And that moves us along to discussion item number 7.1, the North Oakville East Commercial Study. Council, let me ask first if you're satisfied with the report materials or if you need a synopsis and a presentation and so on. The way to do that is to give me a motion instead. Councillor Adams?
I'll give you a motion to start us off, but if staff do have some additional information, I know they've consulted with us on this, but I'm not sure if there's some new highlights that they might have wanted to bring forward as part of their presentation materials, because I know we had good discussions about the need to deal with sites that we haven't been happy with the results that we've had in the past, and we, I think, need to work harder at some of those things.
Mr. Bigger, do you have new information?
Through you, Mayor Burton. What we have prepared is a presentation that begins with some background, how we reached a point of needing this study, and then the contents of the study report, and then some directions that we're going to take. So it's not new information, but it is for council's benefit and the public benefit if you wish to see that brought forward.
Thank you, Mr. Bigger. Councillor Adams, I'll take your motion. Oh.
I was giving you the staff recommendation as a starting point for the
Right.
conversation tonight, yeah.
Okay. We're not done listening to council. Councillor Elgar is next.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Burton. I must say, I've never read a report quite as good as this. The consultants you've hired, I don't know what it costs, but I'm curious to know, because they really helped set out Northeast Oakville. Excellent job. A couple of questions. When we talk about the population 444 by 2051, that hasn't been approved by council, correct?
Through you, Mayor Burton, to the councillor. No, that is our working forecast for the joint best planning estimates. And as we know, that's an evolving forecast.
Right. So that isn't a for sure thing yet. What I just think this report, I'd like to see it in other areas too, because they point out that is a younger population up there. They have more children up there. It's an interesting where we're going in that portion of Oakville. And I think it's one of the best reports I've seen from a marketing context. So I compliment you on that for doing this. And I don't think I've ever seen this before. Have we been doing this on a regular basis?
Through you, Mayor Burton, we have a history of employment commercial review studies in our background. We're quite pleased with this report as well.
Yeah, they did an excellent job. So that's all I wanted to say, and I thank you, because I think we can all, if we read this report in detail, and there's so much I have learned, and I realize when I see how many people they work outside of Oakville, and with where people are going, and it's a real thing everybody should really dig into. So that's all I have to say, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Elgar. Councillor Haslett-Dill.
Kirk, I really would like to see the presentation. The background I'm less worried about. I've got through that, but I think what you commented, that the public would benefit from you sharing that background. There's a significant amount of our population that probably asks the question about what's happening and how we're supporting their needs. I concur with Councillor Elgar. It's an excellent report. If council would indulge me, I think we'd benefit from your presentation.
Councillor, the presentation is about to begin.
Thank you very much, Councillor. And through you, Mayor Burton, I'll just add, before we get rolling, that this is fundamentally a directions report. So we're not making any decisions tonight, and there'll be lots of future opportunities for council to be engaged in the development of these proposals and where the new commercial will be situated in North Oakville East. And so there's future opportunities to implement these directions together. So we have our team here today, which I'll get to in a moment. We're going to share the presentation. I'm going to lead us out with a bit of context and situating our work, and then the consultants will take us through the study, and then I'll wrap up with our directions. Again, like we like to start all of these conversations with just a review townwide. This is our urban structure, and the red circle indicates the area of interest this evening, the North Oakville East area, which is essentially from the creek over 16 Mile Creek over to Winston Churchill Boulevard, 9th line, excuse me, and Dundas north to the 407. This is what we refer to as the North Oakville East secondary plan area. The vision of North Oakville is really, it's been mentioned in previous meetings, also earlier this evening with Catherine's presentation. The intent is to build a mixed-use, complete community supported by transit at a very high and basic level. What we've seen over time in the commercial part of the mix, the policies in the official plan have been perhaps overly flexible, and we've seen, without requirements for commercial, a lot of residential growth. We're reaching a point now that we have some remaining opportunities, and we want to make sure we capture those opportunities to provide for those complete community elements and the commercial elements in North Oakville. The study gets into great detail about market conditions and other factors influencing commercial development these days. It's complicated, it's difficult, but we need to continue to bring that forward to our community. Retail trends, rising construction costs, also factors that limit commercial. Just a quick background, how we got here. So the North Oakville East secondary plan was approved in January of 2008 with a plan horizon to 2021. It was based on the 1997 provincial policy statement and the town's 1984 official plan. So it's past due, and it's under review through our ongoing official plan, and this is a key component, again, to deliver that complete community. Since 2008, there's been ongoing planning and development. As mentioned, we've tried to encourage and require commercial in some locations, and we've had some uptake, I'll say limited, and we have these deficiencies now that we aim to address through this work. As a result, we initiated this study and brought our consultants on to help with that in May of 23. So here we are with the North Oakville East Commercial Study, and I'll hand it over in a moment. I would be remiss if I didn't also mention our colleague here, Nada El-Masri, who is the project manager that carried this to the line where we are tonight. So she's worked very hard to support this project, and she's about the third planner we've had run through with all the timeline and with changing to the complement. So she's done a great job. I'd like to introduce our consultants. We have Christopher White from Parcel Economics, and we have Andrew Davidge from Gladkey Planning Associates. And they're going to take us through the study and provide a little bit more detail about what we've done. Again, the purpose of this work is to give us direction through council, to direct us to update the policies and to require additional commercial development as part of a complete community in North Oakville East. Over to you, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirk, and good evening, Mayor Burton, and through you, members of council. So as you just heard, my name is Chris White. I am a principal and co-founder of a company called Parcel. We're a land economics consultancy based in Toronto. And let me just make sure this is working here. Just a bit of a delay, okay. And so as you heard, we were retained by the town last year, and our kind of main objective here has been to prepare a range of kind of research and analytical support, a little bit of a technical boost to some thought process and policy initiatives in this area, and provide some strategic direction, a bit of a roadmap in terms of what to do in light of the current context around changes in the retail sector and in real estate development and land use planning more broadly. And that's kind of the respective or commensurate areas of expertise that ourselves at Parcel and joined here by Andrew Davidge from Gladkey Planning Associates is that market and economic layer married with that land use policy consideration. And as you heard from Kirk just a moment ago, the kind of crux of this is the in-place North Oakville East Secondary Plan is such that it kind of envisions and it provides the framework for this development of a mixed-use complete community. But the challenge to date has been, frankly, that there's been that kind of relatively limited uptake and as a function of a number of challenges that I'll walk through the course of this presentation. And sorry, just a quick check. If people hear me, I know I'm hunched over to them. Yeah, okay, great. So in terms of the nature of the scope that we undertook, I won't go into full detail. There's some, I think, 150 plus pages of technical report for those who want to sink their teeth into it. But what we started off with was, which is typical of most market studies, a consideration of the kind of site or area profile. So physical and access locations, connectivity through transportation networks and so on. And also having regard for the relationship of this area, not only kind of specific nodes within the North Oakville East Secondary Plan, but also relative to other commercial districts and nodes throughout the municipality and indeed beyond to other parts of the GTA and so on. In parallel to that, we also undertook a review of the current land use policy context. So that was a bit of a hybrid, as you've heard through other work here tonight and other land use planning endeavors. Provincial kind of top-down directions, admittedly a little bit of a moving target as of late, as well as more town-specific and obviously North Oakville East-specific, at least as it exists today, those policy frameworks. And then in kind of parallel to all of the above, we undertook a quite extensive research program. So that was relying on a range of available publicly readily available public information, as well as private information, subscriptions, real estate market conditions, and that sort of thing that we maintain in-house as Parcel. And that included kind of a review of the current and forecast demographic considerations. So obviously two main drivers when we're talking about any and all things retail are future population growth and income characteristics and other demographics. So that was kind of the crux of that, as well as looking at what's on the ground today in terms of commercial supply or inventory, as we call it. And again, both existing and what's potentially coming on stream through the development pipeline in this area over the kind of short, medium, long term. I'll touch on that in a little bit more detail in a moment. And then a range of engagement with different folks, stakeholders involved in this area. So an online survey of local residents to establish their consumer preferences and habits and shopping patterns, what we call customer origin surveys, but essentially looking at anonymized cell phone data to see where people are coming and going and traveling from when shopping, as well as interviews with local folks, landowners, developers, other people active in the commercial real estate sector, not only specific to North Oakville East, but also elsewhere in the GTA and beyond. And as you heard a moment ago, some consideration of kind of broader overarching trends in the commercial real estate sector. It can be fairly tumultuous, especially as of late, coming out of the pandemic and so on. We're talking about the rise of or continued kind of shifts in e-commerce and online shopping, but also just all things kind of equilibrium. I don't think anyone's really kind of figured it out in full, but that balance of work from home versus work in person and that sort of thing has really kind of fundamentally changed all things commercial real estate sector. Relying on all of the above, we prepared a detailed, essentially a demand assessment, kind of forecasting out of what quantum of square footage and what type and perhaps what location and format that ought to prevail in North Oakville East going forward. And then a bit of a kind of collaborative, iterative process from there involving both our folks from our team Parcel as well as from Gladkey and town staff in terms of, again, that kind of roadmap and strategic insights and kind of where do we go from here? What does this all mean for the town? Just to quickly level set, there was a similar map previously that Kirk spoke to. We'll kind of reference a few different geographies through this presentation, but just to be clear, oftentimes with market studies, there's a tendency to deviate a little bit from identified policy areas. We had the good fortune here to basically just stay true and stay the course, one-to-one relationship in terms of the identified policy area, the secondary plan, as well as what we call our trade area or study area. So a lot of the research is based on that. Because there's not a ton of activity on the ground functioning today to operate off of, which is a little bit different than a built context when we're looking at elsewhere, we have considered additional commercial facilities at the periphery, so thinking on the south side of Dundas, at Trafalgar, and so on. But also benchmarking to city or town-wide averages, GTA-wide averages, provincial averages, and which is mainly just for context setting. But unless explicitly said otherwise, we're basically referring to that secondary plan area. So with the next few slides, there's a lot more where this comes from, but we're just kind of going to touch on the demand side of the equation, the supply side of the equation, and then ultimately a bit of a reconciliation of all the above. So again, one of the main drivers, obviously, probably goes without saying, but is the population growth forecast for this area. So whereas what we're looking at today is roughly 25,000 by our estimate in terms of local residents, that's a function of 2021 census data, adjusted upwards, looking at recent CMHC completions data to get a reasonably accurate estimate, a little bit also a consideration of what's going on in existing households and population per unit averages therein. And then forecasting out, and as you heard earlier, tying into the joint best planning estimate. So again, the kind of top-down forecast as established in conjunction with the region. And so what you see here, and unfortunately I've got my cursor hiding here, but thank you very much. So the total population growth netting out to 2051, so the end of that forecast period, tracking to around 116,000 people. So quite a few folks to satisfy the service needs for all things retail, service, commercial moving forward, the equivalent of kind of roughly a smaller, medium-sized community unto itself. So ultimately what that's going to come with is an inevitable need for an expansion and diversification of the local commercial supply. And then speaking of the supply, so on the flip side, what we see today is, again, reasonably limited, about a couple 100,000 square feet of space, all things considered, for the population of this area, not a ton of space, and largely because the functioning of this area is that local residents are basically being satisfied by commercial facilities elsewhere in the town and beyond. So what we call outflow, it's kind of traveling elsewhere. But if we were to take into consideration, again, the commercial facilities located more around the periphery, we get into what we think is a more accurate measure of, tipping the scales on 1 million square feet. So that's kind of what we, frankly, hung our hats on in most of our analysis. And we've also considered layering on top of that proposed developments, as I mentioned earlier, in the commercial development pipeline, or I should just say more broadly, the development application pipeline. So that would, on top of that, add another roughly 185,000 square feet, but that's not a done deal by any stretch. I think that's kind of just the direction based on how those projects are envisioned to proceed. And what we end up with here, this is, again, kind of predicated on an analysis based on per capita expenditures factored up. You assume kind of they capture the percentage of customer support that could be maintained within the local area, as well as some inflow sales support, customer support from elsewhere, visitors, employees, people passing through, and so on. And what you amount to is about 1.8 million square feet out of conservatism on the low side. And the different colors here just represent different store and service categories. As I'll touch on in a moment, kind of a predominant focus on what we call local or neighborhood serving commercial uses. So your food stores, your pharmacies, service establishments, and so on. And this is a bit of a recap of the technical components of the analysis. So what we like to do, and kind of part of our scope for this particular engagement, was to break it out into a few different facets. So again, kind of reiterating that we're netting out to about 1.8 million square feet to the kind of full forecast period out to 2051 in terms of the need for net new space. After discounting for some of the development proposals, that comes down to around 1.6. So that's kind of the ballpark that we're dealing with. And then in terms of type, as I just mentioned, really kind of focusing in on the day-to-day basic shopping needs, kind of the bare minimum needed, and maybe over the longer term horizon, there are a range of other benefits that come with commercial facilities, adding animation and vibrancy and a sense of place to communities, which can kind of come in turn or in parallel to that. In terms of geography, we'll come back to a map that I think was shared a little bit earlier this evening, but we'll speak a little bit more directly to that. Our general takeaway based on the current framework was that there was a bit of a risk, and given all the tumultuous nature of a lot of things in the retail sector, is that there's a risk of kind of spreading too thin. So we really want to right size and focus in on key strategic locations. And then in terms of format, this was touched on again earlier this evening as well, that kind of direction to a more urbanized area, a little bit more mixed-use development vision as set out in the secondary plan. In the kind of immediate short term, we see some potential risks or challenges and kind of barriers to entry associated largely with financial feasibility, but also potential market interest from tenants, leasing interest that would occupy those spaces, as well as that of consumer preferences, just kind of how people like to shop and maybe for the short term a little bit more car dependency and until such time as the transit is there. And there's a few other solutions that we've also layered on just for kind of food for thought. So to recap here, this is again kind of the bit of the roadmap and our suggestions to the town in terms of what this all means. There are kind of part one here, just to understand the challenge, that this is a unique condition. We run into this in a few different places where you're kind of meeting like urban meets suburban, and there's just going to be growing pains with that. So that just needs to be kind of acknowledged and understood from the outset. But that said, there's this established need. Again, significant population growth that'll inevitably come with a need for expansion of that commercial supply. So this is a bit of a kind of timing thing, and it's a bit of a balancing act and admittedly a juggling act too. So in light of all the above, that kind of the pros and cons and the challenges and opportunities there, our suggestion is to maintain some flexibility and continue to adapt. This is, cities and towns and municipalities are dynamic places. That's half the fun here, frankly. That's why I love the industry, but that's going to require to kind of move along with it rather than to kind of force and let the pendulum swing too far in either direction. And kind of similar to in that light of that, to prioritize objectives. We always try to, as a kind of a broader land economics practice, balance out all these different strategic objectives of municipalities and the development community and so on, and recognizing that retail service commercial is just kind of one part of that equation. So as in the midst of what many would characterize a housing crisis, there's a need for housing all the same and to increase supply and improve affordability and so on. So these need to be weighed and kind of compared and contrasted against each other. And that brings us to point 5 here. There's a real, again, admittedly, I don't envy the decision makers and policy makers here, but trying to help out where we can. There's this kind of awkward patience urgency dilemma as we've characterized it. There's kind of a need to keep pace and satisfy that the growth is coming and coming reasonably quickly at that, but also satisfying what has kind of been set out as a longer term vision for the potential future evolution of this area. And again, that's kind of that dynamic harkening back to what I'd mentioned earlier with respect to those kind of basic day-to-day shopping needs versus everything else that can come with retail, maybe in the fullness of time. And then lastly, I mentioned some of those other kind of alternative solutions. So that some of this can just be done to aid and support and nudge in favor a little bit in the interim through maybe a little bit of that struggle. It's worth maybe pointing out our core of our study here hasn't been to look at financial feasibility or pro forma, but based on experience. It's a particularly acute time to be achieving any and all kind of strategic objectives of municipalities. Same goes for affordable housing. As I think you heard Kirk speak to earlier, rising construction cost, interest rates, there are some kind of material challenges there. So there are things that can be done to still establish that sense of place, achieve some of those benefits of retail without necessarily committing too much or asking for too much in the way of the delivery of space, physical space. You can have temporary or shared options. There's kind of in some places, a shrinking, not necessarily all the way to a micro unit kind of context. That's typical more urban environments, but there are kind of similar opportunities here. Incentives, always an option such that that's palatable and something reasonable that can be done both via municipality or from other levels of government and elsewhere, as well as a lot of the work that ourselves and GLADKey have been involved with, thinking of the kind of non-residential component. You can have community facilities and libraries and institutions and academic facilities and so on. They too can contribute in parallel or in tandem with retail facilities as well. And then just quickly rounding out before I pass the mic on to colleague Andrew from GLADKey, this is kind of where we've landed in terms of the broad strokes direction with respect to the location piece. And this has directly been informed by everything that you've seen so far, so the amount and the type and format and so on. So our general recommendation here is to kind of a few takeaways. One, focus in on kind of more of a nodal approach. There's been a shift over the last several years or 5+, once upon a time, in kind of more even including suburban context, there was a desire for kind of like what they call a double stacked or double loaded retail corridor, where every single building includes a certain component of retail. And because of some of these challenges in the evolution and the nature of kind of multi-lane arterial corridors and that sort of thing, trying to create that intimate retail environment is such that you can kind of focus your eggs in a few smaller baskets and select few nodes. So that's kind of the black numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. And through this context, because there already is some commercial existing on the ground today, again, thinking along Dundas, the Fortino's Plaza at number 2 and the kind of Trafalgar Dundas corridor at number 1, there's an opportunity to kind of leverage that critical mass and build upon that and kind of take advantage, frankly, of that to satisfy some of the future growth. From there, we've also recommended, again, going back to that notion of potentially spreading a little bit too thin with the number, quantity of neighborhood activity nodes that were identified in the original secondary plan. Our suggestion was to create a little bit of a kind of hierarchy, a primary and secondary. This goes, frankly, back to kind of similar direction of the shall and should. You can kind of focus in on specific areas and really hang your hats on those, whereas maybe not have that same level of stringency, encourage and enable in any way possible in some of those secondary nodes as well. And with that, I'll pass it on to Andrew.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors. Pleasure to be here with you this evening. I apologize, Chris and I are really stretching the height capacity of your microphone system, but I think you can hear me. So if you can't, just let me know. So our job as the land use planning side of the team is to think about the implications of the technical analysis on the planning framework for the area. The original secondary plan vision was a strong vision for a mixed density, mixed use community, walkable, transit supportive, but also with a real emphasis on quality of place, creating a place that will foster community and contribute to quality of life. And so we want to really keep those targets in mind as we think about the policy directions that we want to give you, as well as thinking about the technical analysis, feedback from stakeholders, and the development that you've seen on the ground so far. I just wanted to drill down a little bit more on the objectives and thinking about, well, in terms of the commercial and the retail and services in the area, what do we really want to achieve? What's essential? And I think the first point here is that we want an appropriate supply of retail and services, commercial development that's scaled to the population. That's a vital element of complete community. If we don't have that, you're missing a big chunk of what you're aiming for in terms of getting that complete community. In terms of a second objective, and this is what ties in with the geographic distribution of that offer, is we want to create some choices as to how people get and access that retail component. So ideally by walking, cycling, and if people need to get in their cars, that we make those car trips short. Another couple of elements which connect into that this quality of place idea and community building is that retail is a sort of a very precious thing in its capacity to enliven and a street frontage and provide a public interaction with the public realm that does really create a place. So we want to think about the animating capacity of retail and how that can be used to contribute to placemaking. And another point as well is, can you locate retail with civic facilities, with institutions, with open spaces in a way that creates community focal points? That's another critical element, and that's one that the city comes in as a partner with the development community in terms of its contribution to those community focal points. So thinking about the existing planning framework, and what's on the ground now, we know that it is lagging. Retail and services, commercial development is lagging behind residential development. So here are a couple of ideas for thinking about how that can be better equilibrated. When you think about the existing secondary plan, you have, in essence, mixed-use buildings. So residential and retail and services combined into a building, retail and services aggregated. And these are high density along arterials, but also available in lower density areas through the neighborhood activity centers. And so one thing we can think about, and Chris showed the map that sort of provided the geographic extent or the geographic imprint of this principle number one of rethinking the place of commercial within the urban structure, is to move from the arterial street. So again, that long strip of frontages along an arterial. Could we move from that to a more of a key cluster idea? So at those four corners, and as well to encourage in those neighborhood activity centers, maybe concentrating those uses in the primary centers where they would have a bit more of a critical mass, and leaving the secondary areas as sort of would be nice to haves and very much more local serving. So we still have good geographic distribution, still encouraging people to walk and access these spaces by means other than cars, but also providing for access by vehicles, of course. So on to number two. Oh, actually, one last point on the principle number one. So we have changing the sort of the hierarchy of spaces and the distribution, but also thinking about can we have new configurations? So at those key clusters, the idea formerly was that you would have the retail at the fronting the arterial and animating that arterial. We still want that, but maybe it's not along the entire stretch of the arterial. Maybe it's more of a clustered a cluster, and it's more of an interior, partially at least internally focused. So you would have a strong frontage on the street, but a deeper block and activities, maybe more intimate streets that retail could front onto in that deeper block. As well as in those neighborhood activity centers, thinking about focusing those at-grade animating uses along less busy streets so that you could actually contemplate creating a place. It's very difficult to imagine Trafalgar or Dundas being a place that you want to go on a leisurely stroll on a Sunday night to have an ice cream. You sort of want, but you could easily contemplate having that kind of experience on a less busy street, maybe towards the interior of those communities. The third principle is considering commercial use requirements and incentives. So currently in the planning framework, it's all about permissions. So you can do this, and the result is that people have chosen not to. So back in the day of segregated land uses, you'd have, in a suburban development, you'd have had a residential block and a commercial block, and you would not have had the choice to build houses on that commercial block. It would have been commercial. But in the mixed use context, we want to encourage the mixing of uses rather than the needless segregation. But with that, you give people a choice of what they want to build, and the residential pro forma just works so much better than the commercial pro forma that developers are choosing that route. So the idea is should we include some requirements as well as permissions? So that could be looking at a sub-area, one of those clusters, thinking about the amount of GFA that needs to be there, and you could put a GFA number in for the whole sub-area. You could think of how that could be distributed through the zoning bylaw to a specific requirement on a site, or you could think about the percentage of a non-residential development that you want to occur on that site as a part of the planning framework. Another way is to think about requirements of at grade, so that you might designate certain streets that have to have commercial development at grade. And then I think it's something that this study is laying the foundation for: regular assessments. How are we doing in terms of meeting that population as it grows with the commercial to keep pace? And so, and creating policy language that those do need to occur concurrently, as I heard the word used earlier on this evening. The fourth principle is to think about those interim typologies and formats. Sorry, I think I might have skipped over number two, actually. I apologize for that. So the idea here is that in allowing the interim typologies, we've gotten pushback from the development community about mixed-use, high-density buildings. There's not a lot of interest in that amongst development communities. So, but we don't want to give up on that as a long-term vision of how the area, the ultimate build-out of the community. But we also want to get commercial uses in there day one. And so can we identify areas that could have an interim form? So instead of having mixed-use buildings and structured parking day one, maybe you allow standalone retail and surface parking. You would have intensification plans that could show how those areas would intensify over time to a more higher density form, and a real mixed-use form. And then skipping down to number 4 is the design and placemaking in those interim typologies is still important. We still want good design. We still want a good relationship with the street and the public realm. We still want good access by cycling and pedestrians to those sites. So at that, I think I'll conclude there, and I think, Kirk, you will be finishing up.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks to Chris for the presentation. Here's contact information. My wrap-up really is to kind of repackage a little bit and summarize the results and the findings and reframe them as directions, which is the point of our meeting here tonight, and to get some direction from council. I wanted to highlight for council the public engagement that was undertaken through this study with our key stakeholders involving landowners and industry groups, as well as local developers, looking at best practices and case studies elsewhere as part of the research. And through that, with stakeholder engagement, we came to learn more about some of the challenges facing mixed-use commercial development. In parallel, we had a great conversation with our 3 business improvement areas, Bronte, Kerr, and Downtown. If you could imagine, they're more of a mature state of shopping, retail, service, commercial areas, and some really great information came forward that was relevant to the work here that we've undertaken. And then we've since had additional follow-up stakeholder engagements with our key stakeholders that we've been working with along the way. And I'll say this again, we're still ready to engage with council and also with our stakeholders as we begin to implement some of these directions. Although I will say that there's a level of urgency to our implementation. So just bundling it all up, we have our main directions for amount, how much, type, as in what kind of shops, where are we going to locate these new shops, and what format, what building form will they be located in. Again, some of the high-level concepts that we're pushing forward with, ensuring we have an appropriate supply of commercial for the today and tomorrow populations for a complete community. Access by all modes, vehicles, pedestrians, cycling, and transit, so all kinds of ways to get in and out of these places. Placemaking and urban design, high quality animation at the street and high quality experiences for people on the street. And a key thing that I'm going to flow into here is these focal points, and they exist at 2 levels that have been already spoken to tonight. Again, the principles that Andrew just ran through for us, rethinking the role of commercial in our urban structure and our commercial hierarchy, and there's some other recent provincial changes underway around employment areas and commercial areas, so this is going to connect to that. Allowing for interim typologies, I imagine there'll be some questions around that as we go forward. How do we balance requirements with incentives, we might even talk about some disincentives, and how do we design again for short-term and long-term and full-term development and redevelopment of these sites as they evolve in response to incoming population. This map I think is really great to help kind of position some of these ideas in the landscape in North Oakville. I don't know if I have a pointer on this screen, maybe, but I'll just talk you through it. So we've identified the intersections of interest, 1, 2, 3, 4, the black circles, Neagawa Urban Core, which we heard about earlier, Neagawa and Dundas Street, as well Burnhamthorpe and Trafalgar Road and Dundas. And so using this report, we can begin to implement some of these directions on remaining opportunities for commercial development. And all of these areas, I say, are in transition and evolution with existing conditions, but also development applications coming forward in the near term. And also, I'll add some policy work, some additional study work underway. So Neagawa, you heard from, we're kicking off the Uptown Core at the Uptown Core Growth Area Review, which has lots of potential for addressing some of these issues at intersection 1, which is Dundas and Trafalgar. High transit all through this, high order transit all through these areas as well. So our next steps going forward in terms of implementing these directions, just a reminder that this work feeds into the North Oakville Secondary Plans Review, which is a component of the town's ongoing official plan review. These directions will be incorporated by way of amendment to the North Oakville East Secondary Plan, and there will be implications for zoning as well through that. Urban design guidelines to be created to outline the expectations, how we deal with the interim built form and transition to later intensification, and how we might enhance our policies through that. And we saw, again, an example of implementing these directions of the Niagara Urban Core where we elevated the urban design standards or guidelines into the policies of the official plan. So that, again, raises the importance of it and gives us a little more strength in terms of implementing it. We're going to continue to collaborate with landowners and bring forward work with them collaboratively, excuse me, on their planning applications, as well to be town-initiated work ongoing to implement. And finally, again, the goal is to use our remaining opportunities to deliver appropriate amounts of commercial development throughout North Oakville East. So I'll just highlight for council the recommendation in the report before you. It's to endorse the North Oakville East commercial study attached as Appendix A, and that staff be directed to implement the directions from the North Oakville East commercial study and report back with amendments to the town's official plan for approval as appropriate. And that concludes my presentation, our presentation. If there are any questions, I'd be delighted to
Thank you,
discuss.
Mr. Bigger. Councillor Nanda has a question.
I want to say to you, Mayor Burton, thank you so much for the report. Again, it was very well done, very comprehensive. So I do appreciate that. I think you really hit the nail on the head when you talked about outflow. Living in this area and seeing one of the issues that we've had is with retail in the area. Although it's been pedestrian friendly, walk to community, a lot of our retail places have suffered. We've spoken to staff about this in terms of the commercial that we've had, a lot of live work units. So looking for ways to have something which would have a lot of residents be able to access places that are easily accessible. Fortino's was a great example. It's a great place and it's at grade. With maybe potential for future, they were able to build a small condo in that area as well to have more residents there. But I appreciate that you brought up the fact that I think we do need something more at grade in this Niagara urban core area. Because I think it's more of what our residents are looking for. We do have a lot of retail spaces within the mixed use area, but we do have several businesses that have difficulty getting residents to come in. And I think it's because of the outflow that you spoke to. A lot of people go to the bigger areas, the Walmart superstore area. So I'm glad you brought that up. I think that'll be very important. And I'm also appreciative of the fact that staff talked about the transition between the residential area and our employment areas that are going to be up there. I think this is going to be really important. So I think going forward, it'll be great to look at what opportunities we have to bring a good commercial space into that area. So thank you so much again for the presentation. Thank you, Mayor Burton.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Adams.
Thank you very much for all of the work by everybody. It's a huge team. It's not just a one-man show. I totally understand that. I wondered if you could pull up the map again. And I just wanted to highlight the activity node discussion that we had during the consultations, and it's perhaps the one area that I'm most frustrated about in the entire process of commercial and retail work up here, and that is for those of us who might have been around and taken part in the planning charades that we had with Duaney all those many years ago, where the concept was we're going to have these fabulous boulevards with retail all along the major corridors through North Oakville. It feels like it's shrinking and shrinking and getting farther and farther away as we shrink down to now just nodes, and even those feel farther apart than maybe they would have been. In my experience with the activity node that's at the north end of 8th line there is that it was like pulling teeth to get anything in there at all. And so I wonder, what is it that we're going to see when this comes back as adjustments or changes to our planning regime to try to ensure that the secondary nodes that we're asking for, as well as the primary nodes, really are active and really do have that sense of energy in the community. When I go up to those areas, I see huge amounts of activity in our village squares. Those village squares are just enormously used, and it feels to me like the retail space ought to be the same, but it's not. And so I wonder, what could residents expect to see when this comes back?
Through you, Mayor Burton, I'll start with the answer. I'm glad you took us back, Councillor, to this slide. I skipped over the other bunch of dots on the slide, which is the primary and secondary nodes, and there's no question those are a work in progress. At one time, there was, as we've been discussing, not a requirement at all to produce commercial here, and so we went to residential and maybe some limited commercial. We introduced a requirement to have a mixed-use building, and that's been, it's been more successful, but again, we're not talking about a critical mass in these locations. And so what we would be looking to do with our larger primary nodes would be to increase the requirement for additional space in these locations, a broader range of floor plates and a broader range of sites for uses. There are ways around parking, there are ways around limiting other uses that might mix with them. So those are the sorts of tools we're going to be looking at when we come back.
So one of the things I've always been, one of my tests has always been, could there be a daycare? Or will there be a daycare, more importantly? And the answer has always been effectively no. And the developers and landowners have always said, oh, they're going to be in the schools. You don't need that. And that feels really disheartening. And that, to me, will be my test as to whether we've succeeded on these especially the secondary nodes. I get it when you're at the corner of a major arterial and collector that it's easier to get a retail shop to set up there, but the internal spaces, and if I look at the far northeast element of this plan, that area that's closer to 9th line, there's a huge space there. There's a lot of land and a whole lot of people that are going to be in that neighborhood. And effectively, there is nothing there for them to walk to, especially if they're in the middle of that community. And so the success of those secondary nodes is going to be important to the quality of life and the livability of those communities. So that's why I'm harping on this issue. So this will be the thing I'm looking for when it comes back to the planning.
Through you, Mayor Burton. Thank you, Councillor. I think when we talk about these being directions and continuing to engage and fine-tune our approach, that this conversation with you can continue and really identifying what your experience is on the ground and some of the concerns raised and how we could go forward and address those.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hazeldeal.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Burton. Just following along with that, can you just maybe share with us what you feel would be in a secondary versus a primary versus, I'd like to just peel that back a little bit. What is it we're thinking will accomplish that differentiates the two?
I'll start again with an answer, but we might rely on our colleagues to follow up. Some of the thinking coming forward in the report is that we need to concentrate in these primary locations, and some of the secondary nodes, although different than what we just heard now, we might leave them as is to develop as is and really try and get a larger critical mass of commercial in those remaining primary nodes. So there would be more shops, there would be more area dedicated to commercial, possibly less area dedicated for residential. So we'll be changing those permissions in those locations.
So we're not talking about that plethora of a nail salon or whatever. We're talking about trying to have multiple different services in the primary. The secondary is like convenience type stores. I'm just trying to visualize what will, if somebody moves into the neighborhood, what are they walking to, and what might they have a hesitation to say, I'm getting in a car to go to?
Through you, Mayor Burton. So I think we'll be able to address walkability in all of these locations. We'll be able to offer, and this might link back to the required space when we look at the types of shops and the size of the shops and the location of the shops. We'll use that to inform requirements, again, which could be in policy, like we've tried on with Neagawa Urban Core, so many square meters in this location. That could also flow down into zoning. Again, raising the bar on what we want to see through these requirements.
Okay.
There will, I think, probably, given the location of the primary nodes on arterials, again, back to this urgency and patience and interim condition perspective, we may be in the near term, again, dealing with cars in these locations, but in the long term, intensifying those sites and having more ways of accessing them.
Okay. Principle 3 is, I'll back up. In the report, you're pretty candid with us that there's some frustrations within the commercial and development community in regards to how we've either, from their view, supported or not supported the achievement of what they would like to do. But then I hear a principle that talks about greater flexibility, but maybe balance that, and I'm just, is number 3 going to remove some of those barriers that are perceived by the developers? Are there more specific examples that you would have beyond just putting it in as a principle?
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Through you, Mayor Burton. So a bit of Pandora's box, admittedly. So when we come to incentives, they can come in many forms. And so that's kind of the effort or seeking to help things along when there's a problem or a challenge. And that can be additive from a financial perspective in terms of grants and subsidies, or, as I often joke, candidly, throwing money at the problem sort of thing. It can be relaxation, kind of reducing costs of development fees and property taxes and so on. That's often funneled through a community improvement plan or other specific initiatives, seeking funding and grants through other external outside of the town's purview. And so that has to be kind of married and balanced and traded off with the direction, because I think hopefully you got from the presentation, there are these challenges. I think everyone agrees, development community, public and private, town staff as well, that there's a need for the space. It all comes down to kind of the minutia and exact implementation and so on. So I think recognizing that if there's going to be a requirement, a shall type language in any level of that kind of hierarchy of different commercial nodes, that it may just kind of be cognizant that it may require some helping along and meeting in the middle in that regard too. The only other thing I can think to offer in that regard is that often it's not just the perspective of the landowner or the development community. We talk a lot about, again, wasn't the focus of this analysis, but maybe leaning on some other parallel experience of ours, if it's helpful, is the banks, the lenders, the people who want to see a certain type of tenant or a certain rent achieved and so on. That's a very real thing that's frankly beyond the control of the development community as well. So there's all these different factors, and that's where incentives and other factors can come into play. Again, just kind of being cognizant and aware that that's an element at play, basically.
So thank you for that more fulsome answer. Is it also just some flexibility then on that floor space? And I was reading some of the elements about urban design, which I'm sure ultimately they're going to get the benefit of a great urban design from a marketability. And but in the report, you talk about the tenants' demands. So is it the flexibility on the floor space in general that is also something they're looking for?
Yeah, just make sure we still have audio here. Yeah. Yeah, anytime there's a challenge like this in any facet of real estate development, we often just want to remove friction points. So again, everyone's suffering with it, again, development community and municipality alike. And so the tenant factor, there's a lot of, especially chain retailers, and again, the types of tenants that banks and lenders typically like to see, because it's less risk. It's kind of a surefire thing. They're going to pay the bills on time, and maybe a higher premium than, for better or worse, some other kind of things that we also like to see, but independent shops and mom and pops and daycares, as was brought up earlier, and so on. Just the unfortunate reality that often they don't pay as much or don't have the capability to. So that's in all ways that you can kind of unravel that issue and make it as easy as possible and streamlined. So where I was going with that originally was that a lot of chain retailers in particular have a blueprint, a formula. They want to rinse and repeat and kind of replicate that. So they have certain ideals or floor plans and things like that they want to integrate. So any way that can be accommodated, or again, as you've heard me say earlier, kind of meet in the middle somehow, it can help things along.
But if they get extra housing units on a mixed use, isn't that helping them along?
Again, through you, Mayor Burton, things change, unfortunately. We've even seen modeling out projects, again, from a financial feasibility perspective, mixed use projects. They work in the right time and place. They don't work everywhere. I hate to be more negative about this right now, but we're in a very acute, unfortunate point in time. Again, through a lot of those factors that I mentioned earlier, a pretty severe, what I call hockey stick trend and escalation in construction costs and interest rates. And these things are starting to calm. We're starting to see that spike ease off and even recede a little bit in the case of interest rates. But that makes it extremely challenging, even just for what used to be called the highest and best use ownership residential projects. A lot of those in an apartment typology aren't even kind of penciling out. They're not showing as feasible with no affordable housing or no retail at grade or no employment generating space and so on. So it's very challenging. We're running into this, frankly, coast to coast across Canada in a lot of different communities. So unless you can get to a point where you have very dense developments, again, far beyond maybe what's being contemplated here, that only goes so far, unfortunately. But again, back to that patient's urgency dilemma, that's kind of the crux of it. In time, maybe market conditions and feasibility conditions do improve, whereby that extra residential does go sufficiently far to enable that type of development. So a bit of patience required on that last piece.
I might land on patience versus incentives, but that just might be me. My last question is actually to Mr. Bigger. Do we provide, there's some really great market data here. And so from an economic development perspective, if I'm, absolutely, you're the expert talking to the bank, breaking through some of those barriers, but there's also just marketing who you can attract and how you can attract them. Is that something that this data and all this great insight gets passed over to Rebecca and her team?
Through your Mayor Burton, absolutely there's a role for economic development to play. Maybe we need some BIAs up in this part of the world as well to help organize and to bring forward the types of tenants and the types of mix in the commercial areas. So there's definitely an opportunity to do some proactive marketing, and then that could be a form of incentive, if you will, some support from the municipality to bring in new players, new ideas, and to help fill that out.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Knoll.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the presentation and thanks for the report. I want to echo what everybody was saying, and the quality of this report is excellent. The information you've gathered is really quite eye-opening. I just wanted to seize on something that was just said a few moments ago. There was a comment about the willingness of developers and banks to undertake leases or finance businesses. I think you hit the nail on the head. My experience, so just a little bit of background, I've 24 years on council, and I came to council largely, I was elected largely on the failure of the developer and the municipality at the time to fulfill the commitments made in the Uptown Core. It was planned to be this vibrant, walkable, wonderful entertainment community, and suddenly a Walmart was installed because it was expedient, and it wiped out all other retail opportunities because nobody wants to locate next to a Walmart. It's hard to sell, it's hard to have a bookstore next to a Walmart. But having said that, over the years, I have been made aware of, and I've tried to advocate for various small retailers who have wanted to move into Uptown Core because the landowners, the landlords have a prejudice against independent businesses. They want a franchise attached, they want a head office attached. They're not really willing to take risks. Very few cases of these big developments do we see small independent entrepreneurs have the opportunity to open in these high traffic areas. And so I don't know how we manage that, whether it's incentives or BIAs, as Kurt was suggesting a few moments ago, but that's something I think we should have a really good look at and figure out how we manage that piece, because you're not going to get the vibrancy in these communities without independent retailers being allowed to rent space and have the opportunity to thrive. Yeah, they'll move into the work-live spaces, but they don't have the traffic that's necessary to be successful. They end up with a lot of mortgage brokers and, no offense to Councillor Lischina, chiropractors and dentists and things like that, as opposed to vibrant retail. So that's my editorial comment. My question is, what learnings did you learn or did you take away from reviewing the success or lack thereof of the Uptown Core in particular? Now, I know we're going into this study, but I'm just wondering, from the consultant's perspective, after all this research, did you really take a really deep dive into the history of the Uptown Core area? And if so, how did you, what were your learnings from that?
Through you, Mayor Burton. Yeah, I mean, you hit it. It wasn't central or square to our scope of work necessarily, but we always try to get an understanding, and that was a large part of our kind of kickoff meetings and engagement with town staff, so to speak, in terms of kind of that history and the ongoings and kind of how we got to the place where we are. I'm not sure if they have anything kind of overly insightful in terms of that, as much as it's a very commonplace happenstance. That's one such example of, you couldn't be able to count them in terms of the communities we've worked in. And I come back to that element of time. And so we haven't touched on it in too much detail, but what was like, even there was reference earlier to kind of some of the thinking and maybe the design charrettes and the blue sky and the kind of that great kind of overarching visioning exercises that happen early days. But things change, and so that's why we don't get to see, institutional buildings built with, these articulate details and historical facades and that sort of thing. The economics of development change over time, and so that's very much the case. And we're at this weird kind of point of evolution throughout the course of our engagement. I've equated this area to plenty of others. We've done a lot of work at Downsview in Toronto, the introduction of higher order transit, but an intensely kind of suburban neighborhood that's urbanizing, and there's all these same struggles. Ourselves and Gladly involved at the VMC and so on. There's countless examples of this. We've looked at mall redevelopments that kind of have that more traditional open air context that over time are envisioned to develop. Not to sound like a broken record, but there's an element of patience that worked. There's also an element of maybe consumer preference, use of the car dependency, and so on. That's how people did their vehicle shopping trips at the introduction of the kind of Walmart supercenter formats that had food, kind of supermarket type functions and so on. So that was of the day. And again, cities and towns are dynamic places that can shift and adapt over time. So move with it. With policy is a little bit challenging, but yeah.
Right. So how do we, you've said yourself that this plays out over and over again. There's lots of examples of Uptown Core and Palermo and the other areas that we always had these wonderful, and I had this concern about Midtown Core too, and I raised it about, they show all these wonderful pictures of all these retail areas, and you say, like, that's just never going to happen. How do we actually change the paradigm and avoid this Einstein definition of insanity, doing the same thing and expecting change. How do we actually get to a point where we are encouraging, planning for, creating environment for these developments to actually occur instead of just being incentives to get approvals and to sell homes? Because that's effectively what, in the case of the Uptown Core, that's certainly what was the case. It was a sales incentive. It was very successful. Still is, but it's just never coming to fruition, unless you love Walmart. How do we change this paradigm? And understanding the sands are shifting since the pandemic, online sales have gone through the roof. Your surveys show that. How do we change this?
Through you, Mayor Burton. So some of the times it's a matter of I won't come back to patience, but capacity building and education and kind of leading a horse to water, so to speak, showing where and how it's been done well. We kind of get a chuckle out of this oftentimes in entering into engagements like this. Well, what's a good example of where they've done this really well? And sometimes it could, can be challenging to suffice to say. But there is a kind of a growing contingent of, again, not all developers are alike, not all their return expectations are the same, not all their appetite for risk is the same. So there was mention of that economic development angle. You can kind of seek out certain people. You can't control who owns the lands and what their vision is, and again, what their bottom line is that is needed to advance projects like that. But I also always joke that the hallmark of any good negotiation was everyone's a little bit uncomfortable. So I think that meeting in the middle, there's a lot of agreement. We tried to highlight that in a certain section of our report where there's actually a lot of commonality. As you can imagine, a lot of places we work, there's just, it's much more combative, frankly, between private and public sectors. There's actually quite a bit of alignment and I think buy-in for that need to advance retail uses. So maybe it's that's kind of what we were seeking to achieve through that interim use theory and kind of let things evolve into themselves over time rather than expecting the world in day one or the opposite extreme, not get any retail for many years or decades.
So I'm going to now scratch my third question because you said that you get asked the question of show us an example of how it's done. I was going to ask you that question actually. What's an example of how this has gone well and a municipality has the right balance of policies and I guess incentives or whatever the case is to actually achieve it. So you don't have one necessarily, I assume.
Through you, Mayor Burton, I don't have, unless Andrew can chime in with one necessarily, I doubt it, but one kind of perfect silver bullet solution, like this is how you do it, follow that recipe and kind of stay the course, stick to your guns, so to speak. There are, I think, specific elements or elements that you can glean insights from different pieces of the puzzle, and maybe kind of what we often try to do is map the arc of a community in terms of, especially in the GTA or 905 municipalities, some of your peers, that kind of trend towards urbanization. As I mentioned earlier, this is kind of hyper suburban and urbanizing at the same time. And so you kind of have to meet, the stars need to align a little bit. So there are certainly examples. A lot of them tend to be more urban. Admittedly, there's the density to support them. You can kind of bring out a wider pool of people to participate, tenants, developers, consumer changes, but kind of behaviors have shifted a little bit, which is another thing. We have an online survey, but it should be recognized that a lot of this is just constituents and residents and what they prefer and the formats that they like too, right? So sometimes that takes a little bit, same as housing typologies, that kind of single family white picket fence dynamic with the backyard, shift towards affordability issues and lifestyle choices and so on, car ownership. A lot of these things are moving, so too will the retail context kind of shift with it, but maybe not all the way there quite yet, because you're kind of trying to plan for a community with residents that don't yet occupy those units. So it's a bit of speculation involved, which is always a challenge when you're talking actual real estate investments, right? No one really wants to do it on a speculative basis rather than a more confident.
Okay, last question, and then I have a quick comment. The last question is with respect to, and this may be more of a staff question, can we establish or stronger policies to hold the developers' feet to the fire in terms of being patient? Because we talk about the fact that this is a long game in many cases. I might say it's a generational long game in some areas, but it's a long game, no question. Are there policies or ways we can hold developers' feet to the fire? And I think specifically of, and I hate to name a specific developer, but I'm going to, Smart Centers gave up on the Uptown Core. I keep using that one because that's my constituency. I share it with Ward 6. But Uptown Core there's 30 and 31-story building being built now where retail was supposed to be, and there's all kinds of this shifting of retail to residential. and if it's a long game, if it's truly a long game, how do we incent, how do we force, how do we create policies to create a better environment to make sure that long game has the time to play out? Because once you build a 31 and 30 tower building, you're never going back to retail. And the retail on the bottom of those buildings is basically minuscule and does not really properly establish a retail market.
I'll jump on that one through you, Mayor Burton. I think what we want to ensure is, this is what we're talking about with the interim typology. So Walmart, love it or hate it, people go there and shop, right? And it's the GFA is there and it's serving people, and it really checks that first box of the 4 objectives. It provides for the needs of the community. Does it really provide walkable access? I mean, maybe a walkable access, but not a walkable environment. Does it contribute to placemaking? No. And so with these interim typologies, GF is there day one. Maybe we can make sure that the second box is checked as well. Maybe we can make sure that there's a partial check on that last box as well. And if you locate a civic facility, maybe you start developing some kind of community node or focal point. And so you have that requirement day one. It's not in the form you like, but eventually, when there is the market demand for higher density, when that site is redeveloped, you still have that GFA. I mean, you can frame the policy that way. So you have the GFA there, you have the requirement. When it's redeveloped, you have to have it. If it's going to be redeveloped today, you have to have it. You can have residential on top, but that's that core ask is the retail. So that's. And just reiterating what Chris said about the typology, like an example in the GTA that checks all the boxes, and there really aren't that many. There's a lot of examples that we can sort of pull different elements. So that really works well there. That doesn't work well there. But there hasn't really been a magic bullet in terms of the policy framework, because ultimately we have planning tools that are dull, and it's trying to shape private investment and private development, and the tools we have we don't get to quite create the things that we have in mind, but in collaboration, I guess we come to a compromise as to how we can achieve the objectives to the maximum extent possible.
Okay, thanks. Now, last for my comment, I just want to reemphasize what I said earlier, so this isn't criticism. The report's great. I look forward to seeing how it's implemented, and I'm going to be keeping a close eye on it. But if in future, please don't call the Oak Park / Uptown Core shopping area the Walmart Plaza. Those of us who live in those areas, that's not how we want to be known as the Walmart Plaza. So just we do have a name for it. So in future reports, if we can refer to it by the Oak Park on one side or the Uptown Core shopping area, that'd be great.
Through you, Mayor Burton, that's noted, Councillor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hazatiel?
Sorry, 2 last comments. One is, I did want to say, I was really pleased that you actually called out that, we should stop this madness that we think that walking Dundas is pedestrian oriented and push it inside. So totally support that. I'm a tad confused on if we have a requirement and we say you can build in a certain pocket at 30 stories and the bottom must be mixed use. If we create, and I think I learned this from Councillor Knoll a while ago, that the spacing is correct to enable different commercial use. Are you suggesting we still need to give them an incentive when they're going to get potentially 30 stories with just the base being at grade, a viable, more flexible space on the ground floor? I just want to be clear.
Through you, Mayor Burton. So perhaps first to clarify, we haven't run out any site-specific pro formas or financial feasibility analysis. Can't say definitively, but again, relying on some experience elsewhere. Short answer is yes, unfortunately, being the bearers of bad news. Time and time again over the course of the last just roughly year or two especially, it's been this very unfortunate, the opposites of these stars aligning, just all these different compounded factors. We talk a lot about this in affordable housing strategies and similar. There's been, rising land values and population pressures, and then provincial policy changes, and all the construction costs rising and interest rates, and you get this messy kind of hairy meatball, and so you need to unravel it with all these different, equal number of solutions. Some of those are incentives and so on. It's the same case here. So yes, in short, absolutely, we're seeing projects that have no retail at grade, full kind of market residential uses that still don't work from a financial feasibility today. Again, we're fairly bullish and confident that that's going to change in the coming years, but as we stand here right now in council chambers, that the unfortunate dynamic in a lot of sites and across the GTA and beyond.
Can we retain them to do a little bit more of the pro forma stuff and spend some time with us on that? Just sidebar. Thank you very much for your information.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to call the vote on the motion. Any objection? There being none, Madam Clerk, that carries. Thank you. Council, we now have the consideration of objection to notice of intent to designate the Georgia Cottage at 19 Head Street. Staff are available if you have questions. We have a delegation, being the objector. I would propose that we hear the objector and then consider what questions you may have for anyone. And I apologize to you, Mr. White, and thank you for your patience in waiting so long for us. Madam Clerk, would you, or maybe you've already admitted him to the meeting. Mr. White, will we see you or only hear you?
I am here, no worries. It was quite fascinating. As a citizen, after hearing all that, I just want to echo a few things from Councilman Knoll. I grew up in Oakville, so my first 20 years here, moved to Toronto when I wanted to raise a family. I came back. You may think because I'm objecting to the designation, I'm very anti-Old Oakville. I am not at all. I love Oakville. I love the way the town is. And hearing how these future developments are going to turn into what happened with the Uptown Core. I remember when that was first being developed and how exciting it was, and how it ended up was not at all myself or anybody I know envisioned. Also, with walkability and those secondary and primary nodes, I don't necessarily believe those will end up happening. I would not have moved back to Oakville except for the area I live in now. The walkability is amazing. I can walk to a one-star Michelin star restaurant or up to film.ca to watch a movie, which a lot of parts in Oakville you could have to drive to go to a convenience store. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
Mr. White,
Yep.
before you begin on your matter, I'm going to reset the clock so that you're not penalized for your contributions to our previous discussion. There you go.
Certainly.
Go ahead.
So thank you again. A few things I think I'd already mentioned. I grew up in Oakville. I have moved back to Oakville. I think part of the one arguments was the plan. I have no intention of making changes to the home. I love the fact we have a historical home. We did a major reno. We did not touch any of the old home. We plan to live here for the next 20 some odd years. A big part of my objection is having the government, the local municipal, what have you, come in and say, I want, to in a sense, restrict, my homeowner rights, putting excessive legislation upon my home. I've invested over $1 million into purchasing a home, doing this renovation. And, I, again, have zero plan, and I understand if there was a fear that I was coming in here as somebody who wants to destroy this, tear it down, and put up something, but I am not. Also, throughout this process, I was quite, saying this isn't something I'm comfortable, I wouldn't like to do it, and was repeatedly told that's too bad, it's going to happen. And then it was a very, which also makes me not love having the government involved in certain things. A bit of a mess. They kind of came to me in May and said, here's a thing, they mailed it to me, and I said, oh, what's happening? And they said, well, we're going to do a meeting on the 20th in May, and then in June there'll be another meeting, and after that, if it goes to this point, you'll get an email notifying you that this has happened, and you can, put your objections and say what you will. Fast forward to August, I wrote an email saying I've not received anything. only to be informed, oh, we actually all moved the meetings. They've been postponed. Nothing's happened. Don't worry about it. We'll keep you informed again. By email after the meeting. It should happen in September. And instead, it did happen finally in September. And instead of an email, I got something in the mail, which was why I kind of responded a couple of days late from the notice. But as opposed to getting an email, I was again mailed something. So to that point, I just do not feel comfortable. I don't like the idea of the government coming in and saying, I want to take control of certain aspects of my home ownership. To the second point of the historical side, again, I love Oakville. I'm not here to disparage any part of our history. It seems to be the focus is on Merrick Thomas, who was, part of the founding people. He was a friend and worked for the Chisholms as a city councilor there. And, I think a big part of why we kind of build him up is we were able to salvage one of his homes, which is already a historical museum within Oakville. We've named a street after him. And my house was kind of built essentially after he died. And it looks like his widow, who was the sister of one of the Chisholms, his wife, the wife's sister, and they potentially purchased it, had it as a cottage, if you will, I guess. And then I'm not sure if they, in the reports, things seem to be built up a little as far as saying this was their main point of residence. I tried reading through everything on the historical site. The only thing I could find was they mentioned that the Thomas owned a home. It was his homestead. And after he died, his wife and children lived there until 1890, much past the time they said this was the main residence for Esther Thomas. So again, any home within Oakville of a certain age, 1855, let's say, will have a pretty good history, and I'm sure we'll have some connection to some of the major players within Oakville. But I don't think that just, and if that is the case, I would prefer there just be a resolution. Any home of a certain age is going to be historical, because you could look at the history, build up a story, and, make it somewhat compelling. And it seems to be, what the city wants it to be. When we were sold our historical plaque, for instance, it didn't say Georgia Cottage, which is all over this report. It looks nice and looks great and sounds historical. It said John J. Hibbard Joyner, which maybe isn't as historically exciting to it, but they were fine to sell us a plaque saying that. I guess the final point is I don't know what I don't know, to the point I have read what they've said. People have assured me there'll be no issues with this or that or anything moving forward. It's sometimes been my experience that what I don't know and what could happen in the future can come back to bite me, because this has now been put into law and I didn't fully understand. As a kind of example, it's slightly different. When I did my renovation, Oakville Hydro, and even our contractor was shocked. We had to take out the power line and put it back in. And he said, not a problem, all the houses are connected. But when we went to do that, Oakville Hydro said, no, we consider your home a new build, and it's going to be an extra $12,000 we have to bury and do a line underneath. And if we want to fight it, it would take 6 months or whatever. And now I'm hearing from the other side of the city, no, we consider your home historical home that's there forever. And, I don't know what I don't know. And just being promised that nothing bad will be affected, it doesn't sit well with me. If people want to keep a watch on this, I put in a permit for something, jump all over it. If you want to talk to somebody in 25 years after I sell the house, or whatever, great. I just do not feel comfortable with the way things stand. And that's my objection. Oh, also one other thing. When I did mention the objection, I was kind of told, well, people have objected before, and nobody has ever had their objection taken serious, like taken. I don't know what that meant or what was even said to me, but and maybe it doesn't matter what anyone objects or says, it'll never be accepted. But that again did not make me feel comfortable sharing somewhat of a responsibility of my home with the municipal government. That's my piece.
Thank you very much, Mr. White, and for the very interesting history that you provided as well. I'll confine it to table. Council, do you have questions for anyone? Thank you, Mr. White. Ms. Lichtenhorst, I think council and the public would find it useful for you to explain the legal basis on which heritage designations are created, and if you could also explain the difference between a historical plaque and a heritage designation. And also, thirdly, what would be the expected criteria to object to a heritage designation? And there I'm referring to the legislation's specification of the criteria that you have to meet. And that, I think, might put a wrapping around this that would make it easier for everybody to understand. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Thank you, Mayor Burton. So first of all, you're all aware of the project we're currently working on, which is the designation project, and it's a reaction to Bill 23, which has changed the process by which we can list properties and retain listed properties on our municipal heritage registers. So as of January 1st, 2027, this property will have no heritage status, so it won't be protected through that listing, that flag that we have currently, which means that as of January 1st, 2027, the building could be demolished with no special heritage approval. Oh, yes,
Maybe
Mayor
you just
Burton.
back up. The Register of Properties of Interest, I think you need to maybe expand a little bit on that versus heritage designation, because this two-tier approach to heritage preservation is what the province has done away with. And I think most people in the public are not aware of that.
Sure. No, I'm happy to clarify. So we have, under the provincial legislation in Ontario, we have what we call listed properties, and we have designated properties. Designated properties are those that are protected by a designation bylaw, either individually or as part of a heritage conservation district. Listed properties don't have the same restrictions as a designated heritage property does. It's essentially a flag that we keep on the property until such time that we can designate them or assess them for designation. So the town has had just under 300 properties that remain on the register that we've been going through as part of this designation project because the province has changed the requirements for municipalities in terms of retaining those listed properties on the register. There is now a maximum 2-year or there was a 2-year timeline by which all of the properties had to be removed. That was extended for a total of 4 years until January 1st, 2027. So as of 2027, all of the listed properties which have that flag and that protection will no longer have any heritage protection unless they are designated. And so this is why through this project we have looked at properties like this one, and we are recommending it for designation because we believe it's of cultural heritage value. It's important to Oakville's history and to the streetscape and the character of this area, especially of Oakville. And so it's our recommendation that the property be designated to protect it from being demolished. We do appreciate that the current owner has kept it, has renovated it, and done a lovely job. But of course, we can't guarantee that that will remain the way it is. So properties get sold, changes, plans change. And so in that case, we really can't protect the building unless we do this designation in terms of ensuring that it's retained on site. So hopefully that answers the first piece in terms of listed and designated and why we're approaching it and why we're looking at designating it. The plaque, the second piece, the plaque that's on the property now was put on there by the Oakville Historical Society. So there's no regulation or anything like that. This related to the town of Oakville with that plaque. It's really just a fundraising activity that the Historical Society does. So yes, I think typically they put the name of the builder on it, and so that's what they've got. When we did more extensive research, which we do through these designation projects, we did find the historical name of Georgia Cottage, which is why we recommended using it. And then thirdly, the criteria. So again, the province sets out the criteria by which we can designate a property. There are 9 criteria, and we do need to make sure the property meets at least 2. And in this case, we believe it meets 4. So the first is the design and physical value. Again, it is one of the older homes in Oakville. It is an early example of an 1855 or mid-19th century Oakville vernacular home. It does have influences from the Georgian and neoclassical periods, sort of typical of that time. And secondly, it has historical value for its associations with the Thomas family, who was associated with the property and believed to have lived on it for over 100 years. And again, there was that connection to the Merrick Thomas house that's a town-owned designated property. The way we look at it, typically, it doesn't mean, you know, that we have one house from a prominent family is designated that we wouldn't designate another. There's certainly no restrictions on that. We're really just looking at the criteria set by the province. The other piece too is that it was also associated with George Atkins. He was quite a prominent person in Oakville who did a lot of work helping to develop what we know today as Conservation Halton. He was a well-known radio and television broadcaster. He was a member of the Order of Canada for doing a lot of work with agriculture locally, but also on a national level as well. And then finally, 2 of the criteria are associated with the contextual value for the neighborhood. It's a really important piece of the landscape and what was really a working class neighborhood for the tannery and for a lot of 19th century businesses. So from our perspective, it's really an integral piece of those surroundings and of that neighborhood. It's a prominent building on a corner. It's been well known for many years. So altogether, for us, this meets 4 of the criteria. We think it's a significant piece of Oakville's history. And so our stance has not changed from a staff perspective. We still believe that it's definitely worthy of designation. So that's why we've continuing to recommend designation for you tonight, and we have the bylaw included as well.
Thank you very much for answering my questions. Councillor Chisholm may have supplemental.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, a question. Designation, of course, I understand the designation and the process and the evidence-based information, historical information is very accurate. However, what year that the town looked at all potential heritage homes or estates or whatever as a possible, I think it was called registered rather than designation. When was this piece of property registered with the town? What year?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, I'm just going to bring up the share report. I believe we have it here as 2009, so it'd be 15 years ago it was added.
Okay, so 2009, Mr. White's, I'm not sure when he purchased that property, but was he aware of the registration at that time?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, of course, I can't speak for Mr. White. The listed status is not registered on title, but we have it made very clear on the town's website, and we work closely with our realtors. So typically, those that type of information would be relayed by the realtor and should have been, absolutely.
Okay, so could it be assumed that this was not a surprise that this would be a designated property to the homeowner?
I would think so. That would list it. It would not be a surprise. It was already listed. Of course, the designation is a separate process, but I would think they would have known it was listed, correct?
Okay, thank you.
All right, Council, I see no other questions. I'll look for a motion.
So, just to reiterate on that point there, we were kind of left on the impression that there was a possibility at some point that we'd maybe be putting up for designation, but of course we would be able to put our objections, and it was kind of made to the point of being like, this isn't a done deal or something that you just get forced into doing, and no matter what, as was said in an email, anybody objects, doesn't matter, it always goes through. It was kind of the impression I had. To go back to some of the requirements they listed, to my point of being, I would almost prefer if it had been, the city says, any home under 1860 and younger, we are designating, because anything you said about my home would apply to, I believe, almost any house in Oakville of a certain age of those requirements, just by saying, well, it has this texture from that time frame. Well, yes, it was built at that time. If I had a house built in 1860, it would have the same. So I think it's kind of stretching the requirements to that. So that's just my point to those arguments there. The historical association, again, I think is a bit stretched thin, to never being lived in by Mayor Thomas, but his widow had purchased it as potentially a side home, and one of her child did live there as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. White. I'm going to, again, confine the discussion to table now. Councillor Chisholm, you're moving the staff recommendation. Is that correct? Thank you. Is there any objection to Councillor Chisholm's motion? Madam Clerk, I see none. Councillor Chisholm, your motion carries. Council, I invite your attention to the advisory committee minutes from Heritage Oakville's meeting of October 29th, and I'm going to look for a motion. Councillor Giddings, thank you. Council, any objection? There being none, that carries. Could I have a motion to rise and report? Councillor Longo, thank you. Any objection? There being none, that's carried. I rise and report the committee of the whole met and made recommendations on the consent items 4.1 through 4.8, the public hearing items 6.1 and 6.2, the discussion items 7.1 and 7.2, and the advisory committee item 9.1. It would now be in order for a mover and seconder to adopt the report. Councillor Elgar and Councillor Haslett-Deal, thank you. Any objection? There being none, the report is adopted. Council, is there any new business of an emergency, congratulatory, or condolence nature that you'd like to share? Then, in that case, the mover and seconder for consideration and reading of the bylaws is in order. And Councillor Lischina and Councillor Knoll, thank you. Any objection? Madam Clerk, there's no objection, and so the bylaws are considered read and passed. Thank you very much, Council. It's been terrific working with you, and I look forward to the next time. And that ends our meeting.